Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at someone really quite unique in American presidential history, Grover Cleveland.
Hmm.
We've pulled together, biographies, historical takes, even some original documents to really get into his two non-consecutive terms.
Right.
The mission here is to get past the usual timeline, find those key insights, maybe some surprising stuff about this, well, unusual figure.
And it's that break in his presidency that's what makes him so fascinating, isn't it? Being the 22nd and then the 24th president.
Exactly.
It just screams, a complex story, lots of twists and turns in politics and his own life. We've got some great material on his early years, his pretty quick rise in New York politics, and then, of course, the details of both administrations.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not every day someone gets the top job, loses it, and then claws their way back. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Stephen Grover Cleveland, born 1837, Caldwell, New Jersey. What about his early life, his family?
Well, his family background seems pretty influential. His father was a Presbyterian minister, English and Anglo-Irish roots.
Okay.
And his mother, she came from a family of booksellers, also Anglo-Irish, but with German Quaker ancestry too. So kind of an interesting mix there. And family finances were tight, apparently, so he even did a short stint as a mercantile apprentice.
That's interesting. You'd think maybe a business path, but no, he actually turned down a paid college education offer because it meant becoming a minister.
Yeah, that does suggest a certain independent streak, doesn't it? A strong sense of his own direction.
Seems like it.
So instead of that, he headed west to Buffalo, New York. His uncle-in-law, Lewis F. Allen, who was a pretty big deal there, helped him get a clerical job.
The connection.
And that connection was key. It led him to a clerkship in a really established law firm, Rogers, Bowen, and Rogers.
Right, and wasn't that the firm Millard Fillmore had been involved with?
Exactly. So
Okay.
a bit of presidential history there already. It was definitely a good launching pad for him.
So he gets admitted to the New York bar in 1859, starts his own practice a few years later, really building that legal foundation.
He was. By 63, he's appointed assistant DA for Erie County. It's also worth mentioning the Civil War piece,
Okay.
but quite a few others at the time, with the means. He hired a substitute for $150. That was allowed under the Conscription Act back then.
Right. A common practice then, though, something people often look back on now. Okay, so professionally, he's building this reputation, dedicated lawyer, does pro bono work even, like defending those involved in the Fenian raids.
Yes, and he won a libel case, too. He was
That-
definitely making a name for himself in Buffalo legal circles.
Ben's personally.
Well, he lived pretty simply, apparently supported his mother and sisters. He was social, hung out in hotel lobbies, saloons, that sort of thing. But reports say he wasn't really into Buffalo's high society scene.
Interesting. Maybe that kept him grounded, connected to regular folks.
Could be. An early sign, perhaps.
Okay, so let's trace that path from local lawyer to, well, New York politics. He was a Democrat early on, right? Not keen on early Republicans like Fremont or Lincoln.
That seems to be the case. His first shot at elected office, running for district attorney in 65, was close, but he lost.
Right.
But then, 1870, he gets elected sheriff of Erie County.
Yeah.
And that connection to Oscar Folsom was really important there.
Folsom. We'll hear that name again later, won't we?
We will indeed. Folsom's help was vital for the nomination. Now, his time as sheriff, well, it's often described as unremarkable.
Unremarkable.
Yeah, I mean, there was apparently some awareness of graft corruption within the system, but Cleveland didn't really tackle it directly then. But one thing really stands out from that time. A pretty grim duty fell to him personally. Carried out 2 executions.
Wow, personally. He didn't delegate.
No. Patrick Morrissey in 72, John Gaffney in 73.
Yeah.
As sheriff, he could have had a deputy do it, but he chose to do it himself.
That's quite something. Says a lot about maybe his sense of responsibility, however unpleasant.
Perhaps. A willingness to face difficult tasks head on, maybe. After being sheriff, he goes back to law, forms a successful firm. But this period, it also includes something very personal and, well, controversial. The situation with Maria Halpin.
Right. This is a really difficult part of his story.
It is. It's complex. She accused him of rape. The actual nature of their relationship, consensual or not, it's still debated by historians.
And his side.
He accused her of alcoholism. Their child. Well, the child was taken from her, put in an orphanage, and Cleveland paid for his care. Halpin herself was briefly put in an institution. Later on, Cleveland did give her some money to help start a business. But yeah, this whole episode became a huge issue later during the campaigns.
A stark reminder, isn't it? These public figures had private lives, sometimes very troubled ones. Okay, let's move to his next step. Mayor of Buffalo, 1881. This seems like where that anti-corruption reputation really takes off.
Absolutely. He won partly because Republicans were fed up with local corruption, so they crossed over.
And he acted on it.
Oh, yeah. The big one was vetoing a street cleaning contract. It was pretty blatant. The council picked a bidder who was way more expensive, clearly due to connections.
And Cleveland called them out.
He did. His veto message, it was direct, called it a bare-faced, impudent, and shameless scheme. And it worked. The council backed down, gave it to the lowest bidder.
Nice.
He also pushed for a cheaper way to fix the sewer system. Stuff like that built his name, as this honest broker fighting graft, not just in Buffalo, but beyond.
And that reputation, that's what leads him to the governorship in 82.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He was seen as a possibility, got backing from key people like Daniel Manning. There was a split in the Republican Party, a deadlock among Democrats, and Cleveland emerged as the compromise guy. And he won, big time.
And as governor, was it more of the same? Anti-spending, anti-corruption?
Largely, yes. He kept vetoing things he thought were wasteful. One really interesting case was him vetoing a bill for 5-cent fares on New York City's elevated trains.
It wasn't that popular. People didn't like the owner, Jay Gould, right?
Exactly. Gould was widely disliked. But Cleveland vetoed it based on the Constitution, specifically the contract clause. He argued the state couldn't just change Gould's existing franchise agreement, even if people hated Gould.
Wow, sticking to principle even when it's unpopular. How did that go down?
Well, initially, not great with the public, but interestingly, he got praise from newspapers for his principled stand, and even, eventually, support from a young Theodore Roosevelt who'd first wanted the cheaper fare.
Shows his commitment to his view of the law, doesn't it?
It really does. He also wasn't afraid to take on Tammany Hall, the big New York City political machine, and its boss, John Kelly, oppose their candidates, their deals.
That must have cost him some support within the party.
It did. Alienated Tammany. But it also won him respect from reform-minded folks, including Republicans like Roosevelt again. They actually worked together on some city reform laws.
So collaborating across the aisle even back then.
Yeah, and that collaboration, his whole record as governor, really boosted his national profile. It basically set the stage perfectly for 1884.
The presidential election. And the Republicans nominate James G. Blaine, a controversial figure himself, right? The tattooed man.
That's him. Covered in metaphorical tattoos of scandals, mostly financial dealings, this gave the Democrats a real opening. Cleveland seems like the perfect contrast.
So Cleveland gets the nomination, even though Tammany wasn't thrilled.
Right. Support for Samuel Tilden faded. Cleveland emerged. Thomas Hendricks was his running mate. And the campaign, it became all about corruption versus reform. Cleveland's slogan captured it. A public office is a public trust.
And those reformist Republicans, the mugwumps.
They jumped ship from Blaine and backed Cleveland. Huge boost for him. The Democrats hammered Blaine on his railroad deals, the whole burn this letter thing.
But the Republicans fired back hard with the Maria Halpin story. Mama, where's my bat? That chant is infamous.
Brutal stuff. And Cleveland's response was pretty remarkable for the time. He told his supporters, basically, tell the truth.
Just own it.
He admitted he'd supported the child financially. Then, right before the election, Halpin herself gave an affidavit that actually contradicted some of what she'd said before. So it was messy, personal, and very public.
What a campaign. And the election itself was tight.
Incredibly close.
Yeah.
Came down to a few key states. New York, New Jersey, Indiana, Connecticut.
And then there was that Romanism and rebellion line.
Oh, yeah. A supporter of Blaine said it at a rally in New York, basically an anti-Catholic slur. It backfired badly, especially with Irish Catholic voters.
Hurt Blaine significantly.
It did. Cleveland ended up winning those key swing states, including New York, just barely. And that was it. He was president.
First term, 1885 to 89, he comes in with this reform mandate. Tackles the spoils system.
Yeah, right away. Advocated for merit-based appointments, not just handing out jobs to political buddies. Now, it wasn't, a complete overnight revolution.
Right.
He did increase Democratic appointments over time, especially in policy jobs. But it was definitely a shift towards merit compared to who came before him.
A step in that direction. What else marked that first term? Major legislation.
Well, there was the Interstate Commerce Act. That was huge, the first federal regulation of railroads.
Big deal.
And the Dawes Act. Very significant, dealing with Native American lands.
Yeah, and the Dawes Act is, well, it's seen very differently now, isn't it? The impact it had.
Absolutely. The idea, or the stated idea, was assimilation. dividing tribal lands into individual plots. But the reality, it led to a massive loss of Native American land.
How much are we talking?
Huge amounts. Between when it passed in '87 and the 1930s, tribes lost about 2/3 of their land base. It was devastating.
Wow. Okay, other first-term actions.
He pushed for modernizing the Navy, investigated old railroad land grants, actually got a lot of land back for the public domain, and he challenged the Tenure of Office Act.
The post-Civil War thing restricting presidents from firing cabinet members.
That's the one. His challenge eventually led to it being repealed. Shows his view on presidential power.
And he was famous for his vetoes, wasn't he?
Oh, yes, hundreds of them, especially those private pension bills for Civil War veterans. He saw many of them as fraudulent or unjustified.
And the Texas Seed Bill veto, that quote is famous.
Though the people support the government should not support the people.
Yeah, that really sums up his philosophy of limited government, right? Very wary of federal handouts or direct relief.
Definitely a core belief for him. What about the money issue? Silver versus gold.
Big fight. Cleveland was firmly for the gold standard. He opposed coining silver freely, thought it would destabilize the economy. He even tried unsuccessfully to repeal the Bland-Allison Act, which allowed some silver coinage.
So putting him against farmers and debtors mostly who wanted more silver.
Exactly. It was a major dividing line, especially between the East and the West and South.
And tariffs. He wanted them lower.
He did. Pointed to the big surplus in the Treasury as proof they were too high. The Mills bill tried to lower them, passed the House, but died in the Senate.
So mixed success there. Foreign policy. Was he interventionist? No, quite the opposite. Non-interventionist. Less interested in expansion than some others. Negotiated fishing rights with the UK, withdrew a treaty related to the Berlin Conference on Africa.
And military. Focus on defense.
Yeah, self-defense, modernization. The Endicott Board recommended upgrading coastal defenses. He ordered the first steel-hulled warships for the Navy, building up capacity, but not aggressively.
Civil rights, immigration, any major moves?
Not really progress, unfortunately. He saw Reconstruction as a failure, didn't push hard for black voting rights, though he did appoint a black man to replace Frederick Douglass as minister to Haiti.
Okay.
But he also signed the Chinese Exclusion Act, making restrictions tighter. And as we mentioned, the Dawes Act had that terrible impact on Native Americans, even though the stated goal was assimilation.
Right. A complex legacy on those fronts. On a lighter note, though, he got married in the White House.
He did. He was a bachelor when elected. Married Frances Folsom, Oscar Folsom's daughter, remember him? In the White House in 1886.
Wow, full circle.
She was the youngest first lady ever. And it's still the only time a president has actually gotten married in the White House itself.
A unique event. But despite all this, his first term ends with a loss in the 1888 election. He ran against Benjamin Harrison, won the popular vote, but lost the Electoral College. What happened?
A few things went wrong for him. His campaign wasn't run as well as Harrison's. The Republicans really hammered the tariff issue in industrial states, warning workers that lower tariffs meant lost jobs.
They're the workers.
They aimed to work. Plus, there were splits among Democrats back in New York, his home state. And then there was this letter.
The Murchison letter.
That's the one. A letter from the British ambassador surfaced, seeming to support Cleveland. It caused a huge uproar, especially among Irish Americans, cost him votes. He lost New York, lost the election.
So out of office, what did he do between terms?
Moved to New York City, joined a law firm, more like an office-sharing deal, really. Lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. Spent time fishing at his place, Gray Gables. His daughter Ruth was born then.
Did he stay involved in politics? Comment on Harrison.
Well, Harrison's administration brought in the McKinley Tariff, which raised rates even higher, and the Sherman Silver Purchase Act, which increased silver coinage, both things Cleveland strongly opposed.
So he must have been itching to say something.
He held back at first, but eventually he wrote this public letter, became known as the Silver Letter, strongly condemning the silver policy. And that really thrust him back into the political conversation.
Setting the stage for another run in '92.
Exactly. His reputation, plus his clear stance on money, made him the leading contender for the Democrats.
Beat out David B. Hill for the nomination.
Yep, got it on the first ballot. Picked Adlai Stevenson, who was actually pro-silver, as VP to try and balance the ticket.
And it's a rematch against Harrison.
It is. But the move was different. That election was actually pretty quiet, partly because Harrison's wife was very ill. The tariff issue now kind of cut against the Republicans.
Oh, so
People were feeling the effects of the high McKinley tariff. Plus, the new Populist Party was siphoning off some Republican votes out west. The Democrats were more united in New York this time. Cleveland even got some nods from populists and labor.
Right. So a much better outcome for him this time,
Much better. Won by comfortable margins, popular vote, and electoral college.
making him the first, and until, well, very recently, the only president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms. An incredible comeback.
Truly unique in history up to that point.
But that second term, 1893 to 97, it wasn't exactly smooth sailing, was it? Kicked off with a major crisis.
No kidding. The Panic of 1893 hit almost immediately, a severe economic depression. One big factor was the drain on the government's gold reserves, partly blamed on that Sherman Silver Purchase Act he deposed.
So what did he do?
Called Congress into a special session, fought tooth and nail to get the Sherman Act repealed. It was a brutal political battle, split his own party, but he won. It really started the shift away from silver as part of the currency base.
But the gold problem continued.
It did. The Treasury's gold reserves kept shrinking. He ended up having to authorize controversial bond issues, essentially borrowing gold from bankers like J.P. Morgan to prop things up.
Politically tricky.
Very. Made him look close to Wall Street, angered the silver wing of the party even more. He also tried tariff reform again, the Wilson-Gorman Act.
Trying to lower those McKinley rates.
Yeah, aimed for moderate reductions. But the Senate loaded it up with amendments, watered it down quite a bit. It did include an income tax provision, though.
Which the Supreme Court later had issues with, right?
Partially struck it down, yeah. So tariff reform was, again, kind of a mixed bag for him.
What about voting rights in the second term?
He actually worked against the Lodge Bill, which would have meant more federal protection for black voters in the South. And he oversaw the repeal of the Enforcement Act of 1871. So, sadly, a step backward for federal voting rights protection.
And the economic panic fueled labor unrest.
Big time. Conditions were terrible for workers. You had things like Coxey's Army marching on Washingtonite, unemployed workers demanding relief, and then the huge Pullman strike in 1894. Railroad workers nationwide walked out.
And Cleveland intervened forcefully there.
He did. Sent in federal troops, arguing it was necessary to keep the mail moving and interstate commerce flowing. Broke the strike, but it absolutely infuriated labor unions and Democrats like Governor Altgeld of Illinois.
Deepened the divisions within his own party.
Massively. Alienated a huge segment of workers and progressives. But, many newspapers and governors supported his actions at the time, seeing the strike as disruptive. It was a really tense period.
Foreign policy in term 2, Hawaii stands out.
Yes, his anti-imperialist stance was clear there. American sugar planters, with some U.S. diplomatic help, had overthrown Queen Liliuokalani. Harrison had favored annexation.
But Cleveland stopped it.
He put the brakes on, sent James Blount to investigate. Blount's report basically said the overthrow was improper. Cleveland wanted to restore the Queen.
Did it happen?
No. It got complicated. The Queen initially wouldn't guarantee amnesty for the coup plotters, and the provisional government wouldn't yield power. Cleveland ended up just referring it to Congress, basically killing annexation for the time being.
A principled, but maybe ultimately an effective stand in that case.
You could see it that way.
Yeah.
He also took a strong stance in the Venezuelan crisis with Britain.
Asserting the Monroe Doctrine.
Very broadly, yes. Demanded Britain agree to arbitrate a border dispute it had with Venezuela over British Guiana. It was pretty bold, risked conflict, but Britain eventually agreed. It actually boosted U.S. influence in Latin America and improved relations with Britain in the long run.
Interesting outcome. Military policy. Still modernizing.
Yep, continued the work. More coastal fortifications, adopted the new Craig-Jurgensen rifle for the Army, ordered new battleships, torpedo boats, keeping the Navy buildup going.
Okay, now, one of the most astonishing things from the second term, the secret cancer surgery.
Just incredible, isn't it? In the middle of the Panic of 1893, he finds out he has this cancerous growth in his mouth.
And they kept it completely secret.
Totally secret. He was terrified it would cause public panic if people knew the president had cancer during a major depression. The surgery was done on a yacht, disguised as a fishing trip.
On a yacht? Amazing.
Removed the tumor. It was successful, but it did leave his mouth somewhat disfigured. He needed a prosthetic device afterwards. The cover story was that he'd had a couple of bad teeth pulled.
And people bought it.
Apparently so. The full story didn't come out for many, many years. Just shows the lengths they went to maintain stability or perceive stability.
Incredible story. Judicial appointments any easier second time around.
Still tough. Senator David Hill from New York, his old rival, blocked 2 of his Supreme Court nominees, Hornblower and Peckham, the first time.
Obstruction.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
He finally got Edward Douglas White confirmed and then managed to get Rufus Peckham approved on the second try. And Utah became a state during his second term, 1896.
Right. Which brings us to the end of that term and the 1896 election. The Democratic Party looked very different by then.
Completely transformed. The Civil Rights had taken over. They nominated William Jennings Bryan on that famous cross of gold, free silver platform. It was a total rejection of Cleveland's gold standard policies.
What did Cleveland do?
He couldn't support Bryan. He quietly backed a third-party ticket, the Gold Democrats, who tried to nominate him, but he declined. He was essentially a man without a party at that point.
And the Republicans nominated William McKinley,
who ran on the gold standard and won the election, defeating Bryan. And that was the end of Cleveland's political career.
So, retirement. He moved to Princeton, New Jersey.
Yep. Bought an estate called Westland Mansion, stayed somewhat active, served as a trustee for Princeton University, occasionally consulted with Teddy Roosevelt when TR was president.
Any other light life stances?
He spoke out against women's suffrage, which was gaining momentum then. There was even brief talk of him running for Senate in 1906. Nothing came of it.
And he passed away in 1908. Those reported last words.
I have tried so hard to do right. Kind of sums up his persona, doesn't it? That sense of duty, of trying to stick to his principles. He's buried in Princeton Cemetery.
His legacy is remembered in places like Cleveland Park in D.C.
Named after his summer home there, yeah. Lots of schools, towns named for him. And he was the first president ever filmed back in 1895.
A little trivia. Appeared on stamps, currency, inducted into the New Jersey Hall of Fame.
So definitely left his mark.
Okay, so let's wrap this deep dive up. Grover Cleveland. What a unique path. 2 terms, split apart, defined by this constant fight against corruption, dealing with major economic shifts, making really significant policy calls.
And that unwavering commitment to his core beliefs, limited government, the gold standard, things that won him praise from some, but fierce opposition from others.
Yeah, definitely defining features.
Yeah.
And we uncovered some genuinely surprising details. That secret surgery is just wild. And the White House wedding.
His story is full of them. What's really striking, I think, is how consistently he stuck to his guns, even when it was deeply unpopular or politically damaging. And that comeback, winning again after being defeated, it really makes you think about presidential power, legacy, resilience.
Okay, so here's a final thought for you listening. Today's political world feels so different, doesn't it? But are there lessons we can maybe take from Cleveland's way of sticking to his principles, even unpopular ones? And how does his unique experience reclaiming the presidency after being voted out change how you think about what it means to lead and what kind of mark a leader leaves on history?
Definitely something to mull over.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.